You've met with a terrible fate, haven't you? One of the most well-known phrases in gaming. It crossed gamers' CRT TVs on October 26, 2000 and changed a generation of gamers. The game I've been referring to is none other than The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask. Known for its dark themes and Groundhog Day-style gameplay loop, it quickly became beloved by all. Ever since I was young, I've heard stories about this game and how its development was unique for such a large franchise. Let's take a look at that development. Before we begin looking at Majora's Mask, we have to talk about Ocarina of Time. It was released on November 21st, 1998 to critical acclaim and is considered one of the best video games ever made. I'll make an episode on Ocarina's development at some point later on. The gist is that the game initially planned to be made on the 64DD. The 64DD is a disk attachment for the N64 that would allow usage of floppy disks and online features. These disks would be cheaper to make, have bigger storage capabilities, and read and write entire games. They ended up switching over to the cartridge format due to motion data issues. Satoru Iwata had said ROM cartridges don't have any moving mechanical parts, so they can read motion data in an instant, no matter where it's sorted. However, with the magnetic disc, like in the 64DD, it takes time for the mechanical parts to move around, meaning you have a loading time while it's locating the data. As a result, we couldn't get Link's motions to work. If there hadn't been as many motions, we could have gotten the game to read them to memory from the disc in advance, but we had around 500 motion patterns. The rest of Ocarina's development took place on a cartridge. They didn't give up on a version for the 64DD though. After Ocarina's release, the team started working on a new version called Ura Zelda 64. Ura is a Japanese word for other side. The plan for this version was to mirror the overworld. Enemies would deal double damage, and the dungeons would be completely rearranged. Eiji Aonuma was not a fan of this idea. Still, as someone who has been in charge of the dungeons, I just couldn't get that excited over making a flip side for them. I couldn't see it turning into a new Legend of Zelda either. But we've been told to make Legend of Zelda. It isn't as though we could just say, I don't want to, and end it there. At that point, Miyamoto-san gave us a trade-off. He said if we could make a new Legend of Zelda game in 1 year, then it wouldn't have to be a flip side. After this, the role of leader naturally went to Aonuma. With a new game to make and a 1-year time limit, the team went right into crunch and mandatory overtime. The easiest way to save time was to reuse Ocarina's engine and assets. The biggest problem Aonuma had, though, was what would the successor to Ocarina of Time look like? Ocarina had over 7 million units sold at the time, so the pressure was on. Aonuma knew he had to make something ambitious with the small team he had. He also knew that the game would have to be smaller in scope than Ocarina. Aonuma decided to reach out to a fellow director who worked on Ocarina, Yoshiaki Koizumi. After Ocarina, Koizumi started working on a board game for Nintendo. The board game would have cops trying to catch robbers, but having a limited amount of time to do so. The players would be in a compact world and play over and over again. Despite this, Aonuma convinced Koizumi to join the production on the next Zelda game. Koizumi joined under the condition that he was allowed to do whatever he wanted. He decided to take the game he was working on and make it work for the next Zelda, thinking that the time-based restriction and repeating cycle would help make a satisfying game. Aonuma liked the idea, believing it would give the game depth instead of breadth. Koizumi initially got his idea from a movie called Run Lola Run. It's another Groundhog Day style of film where the protagonist has a certain amount of time to accomplish something, and the days keep resetting. At first, the game would span a whole week. Aonuma felt that this would make the player remember way too much to keep their interest. They then compressed everything down to 3-day limit that's in the final product. The cycle ended up being pretty easy to make since Ocarina already had a day and night cycle that would change things like which enemies spawn. At some point in development, they swapped development over to the cartridges. This led to the game requiring the 4 MB expansion pack that only it and Donkey Kong 64 use. Those extra 4 MB allow greater draw distances, more accurate dynamic lighting, more detailed texture mapping and animation, complex frame buffer effects such as motion blur, and more characters displayed on screen. I've got a couple more fun facts to go through. The idea for the moon crashing came from a dream Koizumi had. So if I could just give an example of one of those idle daydreams that turns into an idea for a game, I would look up at the moon and think about what would happen if the moon started to fall towards the Earth. From that idea, we moved onto the world in Majora's Mask, which is threatened by being destroyed by the moon. The mask idea / mechanics was actually a leftover idea from Ocarina of Time. We now reach Space World 1999, where Nintendo had a hands-on demo of Majora's Mask. There's almost no footage of this build, and the only video I could find is what you'd expect of a video from 1999. First off, the game wasn't called Majora's Mask yet. It was Zelda Gaiden. The build was roughly 50% complete and played exactly like Ocarina. The only masks available were the transformation ones, and there was only 20 mask slots. The final game is 24 slots. Also, Deku Link shot Deku Nuts instead of his magic bubbles. It's unsure if specifically the 3-day time limit was in the game yet, but they for sure knew they were going to have a time limit at this time. In an interview from here, Miyamoto mentions shoving as much as they can in a short time span. You know, kinda like 3 days. Now let's go over the 3 demo types they showed off. First are race demos. The Goron race initially had spectators off to the side. Goron Link would have also been able to charge up his roll in place without moving. The Zora Link Beaver race was initially a stick collecting game. People were also able to play both Epona sections on the ranch, but there's no known changes. Next are the dungeon demos. Players got to try out the jungle and snowhead dungeons. There are no documented differences from the final product. And then the last one is the Deku Hall infiltration. The changes are mainly all on the map. It's more detailed, and the path to the Deku Shrine doesn't seem to be blocked. The shortcut to Woodfall doesn't seem to exist either. Finally, there were battle demos. There's a battle floor that there's no real info on it, and then also there was the fight with Odolwa. From these demos, we also found a mock-up of the song screen and the menus. Finally, there was a trailer for Space World. The only thing of note that wasn't covered earlier is this room filled with stall childs. It likely got moved to the Icona graveyard. I say this since the one on the left is the one that would sit on the tree, and in the middle of the 3 that would walk around each grave. We've now reached my favorite part. The cut content. Let's start with items. First is the Fairy Ocarina, before they replaced it with the Ocarina of Time. There's a long shot that Zora Link would have been able to use before he got his basic attack. Here's an item called a Hylian Loach. It was likely the original version of the seahorse. Here's Link fishing with a fishing rod. This ended up being re-added in the 3DS remaster. In the final game, when Link is transformed, he keeps the Ocarina item. Originally, each transformation had the instrument instead of the Ocarina. The Goron had the drums, the Zora had his guitar, and the Deku had his pipes. The Stone of Agony was also going to be in the game at one point. Here's a big broadsword that we found in the files. There's also a bronze quiver, which ended up being the base quiver. Here's Link getting music notes. They are meant to symbolize Link getting a new song. Finally, there were adult and kid Link masks. The adult mask would have turned Link into an adult, and was likely replaced by the Fierce Deity mask, while the kid Link mask would have turned him back into a kid from any of his transformations. Now let's go over some functions that didn't make it into the game. The first is the save function from Ocarina of Time. You press L in the menu screen. At one point there's a Triforce transition screen. Here are some mini-map placeholders. The Iron Knuckles have early versions of Naburu's head in their helmets. Here's a placeholder song. There's an unused item slot under the Bomber's Notebook, here. Ocarina of Time had gold Skulltula tokens in this spot, so it's likely leftover. There's also this heat timer that was likely a remnant from bringing over Ocarina's code. Likewise, the change tunic function also exists. The blue one still keeps Link from drowning, but the red one does nothing. Now let's cover cut objects and actors. Here's a bubble. It's similar to the one that the stray fairies are in. There's the fishing pond owner from Ocarina. Here's a dynamic shadow that was also cut from Ocarina. There's a couple effects from when certain songs in Ocarina are played. A random Zora can be found who will walk in place or pace around the room depending on the string used to spawn him in. A giant green bumper can also be found. The woman in a blue dress from the Castletown Market can also be found. She also paces around until given a magic bean. She then talks to the player, but there's no text box. Here we see Ruto, who is found in the game files. She has her Ocarina of Time animations, but she can't be interacted with. Here's the bearded man from the Castletown Market, and the boss's wife from Kakariko Village. Here's an original chair that would have initially been at the milk bar. Finally, Zelda is also in the files, with animations to play her flute. These animations are different from the ones where she plays the ocarina. That's it for all the cut content I'll cover. There's technically more, but it's either something like, here's a rock model that didn't make it in, or things with no visuals, just lines of code we found in the game. In November 1999, Nintendo announced Holiday 2000 as a release window. Miyamoto's plans to delay the game never came to fruition, as Aonuma was convinced they would release the game on time. In March 2000, the next Zelda game was officially announced as The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask, and then it was released officially on April 27, 2000 in Japan, and October 26, 2000 in North America, with a gold cartridge. The game would go on to sell over 3.36 million copies. Since release, the game has been re-released on the GameCube, Wii, and Wii U. It was also remastered for the 3DS. Majora's Mask is widely considered to be one of the best Zelda games, and frequently makes the list for best video games ever made. Since I'm talking about the game's legacy, I have to talk about Ben Drowned. It was a 2010's creepypasta about a haunted cartridge. It spawned an ARG following multiple chapters revealing the backstory of the haunted cartridge. Normally around here I talk about the future of the series, but who knows honestly. Tears of the Kingdom was the latest release, but we do have a new Hyrule Warriors style coming for the Nintendo Switch too. You just need to, pay an arm and a leg if you want to afford it. Other than that, there's no current news about a future Zelda game, though I imagine there's one somewhere in development. If you enjoyed, feel free to subscribe.